Welcome back, audience. Hope you can hear me well. Cheers as always. And I got interesting for you today, relating to game theory, because we talked a lot about the spirit and the zeroing it out and the essence of the game, where you start with, what you start with. But now I want to talk about the game itself, because after all, we live in this life, and the game must be played, right? And I don't mean manipulated. I don't mean like, if you do your alchemy and devotion, then you're gonna be a player of life. You're automatically not going to be on the dark side, because you're freaking awake. All the people that represent the matrix, so to speak, are not a real alive being entity. They are in the mode of non-player character, and they're not conscious. That's just why, like Jesus said, forgive them because they don't know what they've done. They're doing. Why? It's because they're robots, man. Like, you can't ask for the robot to be alive. Now, there could be some have potential to wake up, others don't. Some people have capacity to be in the mode of being awake in someone else's present, who bring that type of energy. Then they fall asleep, and then get automated again. And some are always automated. Okay? So just because you can, like, so quote unquote, end the suffering, doesn't mean that the game is not going on. And there's a lot of information right now. It's about that, not information, but perhaps guidance, how to zero it out and how to get out of that suffering. But I mean, we all live in this world, and every day there are challenges to deal with. And let's just talk about the game that we're playing, because it is the game, and the only enemy that we have is the matrix. And the matrix is something that is within us. Therefore, we have basically an opportunity. When we play the game correctly, we only play against the matrix, and overcome it and win it. Okay, that's the whole point of the game. And so if you want to define what's your score of the game, I would define the more and the closer you are to the truth and love, in this case would be the state of bliss and peace, and of course the colors of it, which is the feelings that you get through the creation and play of life, and the sustainability of that process is how well you're doing in this game. That's your definition. Is basically how truly, genuinely, authentically happy are you, and how well you overcome the challenges that usually most of the time are feeling emotional challenges, how well you overcome them, and how well you take the bad luck and turn it into good luck. Right? That's the definition of the game. As you can see, that's nowhere in this description money came into being. Money is a tool, and it is required in the matrix to be used. But wealth is not money. Obviously, I don't have to tell you that. And of course, the money that we use right now, if you talk about fiat money, then that's basically a monopoly money. That's fake. That's not real. Again, I'm not saying anything new. But there is a real representation of value in this game, which is true wealth, and that may be something like a real estate, Bitcoin, things that require a certain time and energy to be put in to have value, right? Because Bitcoin, if you can't fake Bitcoin, you have to sacrifice time and energy to have Bitcoin. The same thing with the real estate. If I'm talking about developed real estate, of course. The same way, Okay, but if your real estate depends on that system and you don't actually own it, you know, that's another. If it belongs to the debt system, it belongs to the fiat system, and therefore it's not it. You get what I'm trying to say. I don't want to get in too much into this, but let's just talk about this game theory, okay? So, how do you approach the game of life, right? Let's say you've alchemized all your challenges and everything, but now you gotta approach the game. And how do you approach it? Because reality is that in this game, there's going to be people that are on a spectrum. Some of them are completely moved by the matrix. Some of them are going to be sometimes moved sometimes moved by the matrix, sometimes, authentic. Others going to be, like half-half. Others are going to be like never moved by the matrix, always moving from the source. And others are going to be like sometimes moved by the matrix, most of the time moved by the source. And I think this is where I find myself right now. But I don't like when I'm being pushed out of my center. I always try to get back in, but at the same time, I bring myself out of my center as well. Nobody else did it. Nobody else done it. Okay. But okay, so you can know where you are, right? If you're conscious, you say like, well, like I'm half of the time I'm like this, and half of the time I'm kind of automated. Okay, good. You know where you're playing. Now, so what happens when you okay, they did this research long time ago, and it was related to the wars that were going on, and they wanted to see this game theory of like how this whole game can work, right? Because the idea of the game is to, like I said before, right? The feelings, the quality of life. That's what it is, right? And of course the abundance, variety, biodiversity, all those different things. And so for that, sometimes you got to trade with each other, right? To get that variety, to get the rich culture and stuff like that. So when people are like countries and they're trading with each other and doing businesses and stuff like that, because they're people, even though the countries, they can change the laws, but people are changing those laws anyway. So the country is like a frozen ego. And so anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that what happens is that you're going to have on a spectrum all sorts of characters within that one system called country. Now, by the way, this strongly relates to this current discussions of peace between Russia and America, and we'll see how that really works out, okay? And what is a real enemy? As you can see, it's not the Putin, it's not the Trump, it's not even that Ukrainian president. You'll see what's the real enemy. But before we go there, I mean, you already know that the Matrix is the enemy, but you'll see how it manifests there in this particular conflict. And of course, you may have the same thing in your life going on. It's like a fractal, right? It may be like a little version of that thing that's going on over there, but that thing may come to you as well. It's just the way it works. But you can play it well. And so the research that they did, that they created all these versions of people who, a lot of them are cheat, some of them always collaborate, some of them collaborate but retaliate when there's no collaboration, and so on, right? So they created the spectrum of these possible people, and they played against each other, and they gave points, and they saw who wins the game. And what they found out is fascinating. It's because when you have a spectrum, of people from the darkest to the brightest, what happens is that you have these pockets formed, pockets of economy that's sustainably running itself, right? And not allowing the cheaters to enter it. And the cheaters, by not having their own bubble, they die out. They go extinct. Okay? So that's the destiny of the dark side. It's just the way it is. But to play the game, you cannot always collaborate. You cannot always collaborate, and you cannot be this, bunny rabbit type of, have this type of approach. But you can't go back to the dark side either. So the most successful approach is collaborate by default, meaning approach people with trust. Upon first cheating, or upon the first cheating, what you do is, of course, I'm just going to make it more like real life examples, but of course they did it very mechanically, very logically, and but they found that the most successful was the one that collaborates by default. If there is a cheating, retaliation follows, and then on occasions they forgive the cheating. Okay, so what does that say? Because they did not really plug in the spontaneity in this model, it says that the wisest approach is the one that, depending on a situation, you sometimes have to retaliate and sometimes you have to let it go. And you'll find that that's the wisest approach to life. Okay? So now, what often happens when, for example, two types of entities collaborate with each other? One, perhaps in a moment of weakness and influence under the source, under the matrix, not the source, the matrix, they do something that is unfair. Now, the other entity who was collaborating and trusting them to act fairly now sees that they've been obviously cheated upon. Now, on this occasion, what's really going on in real life, if you do have like this emotional response, then probably like those investigation of what really happened probably not gonna go well. So the first order of business, because that event, that cheating, that thing is gonna create that incoherent energy in you. The first order of business is to alchemize that, go back in the center, and then whenever you're already accepted all the possible, outcomes of this situation, then you approach, and you do not approach in a way of accusing them, but questioning, because like if you don't have emotional response to it, you say, all right, I want to see what really happened here, and you give a chance to a person to admit the fact that wasn't basically their authentic self and whatnot, and it was like a moment of weakness, or maybe it was like a miscommunication perhaps, or it wasn't really like that, or whatever, but you give them a chance to let go of their ego in that moment, right? And I think that depends whether the retaliation is necessary or not. Now, if you give them a chance and they say, they double down on their bullshit, for example, right? and you can show it like, look, this is just the way it is, like these are the facts, you know. But that they don't want to admit those facts. They don't want to let go of their ego. They want to keep their ego, right? Rather than being and thinking that they're playing the game by keeping their ego is going to get them somewhere. What happens at this moment? You got to retaliate. In other words, you got to set the boundaries for whatever the behavior it was. Okay? In other words, like if it was a money situation, then do not trust them with the money anymore. So you got to retaliate. Now, on occasions, there is forgiveness. But the forgiveness happens not because you are forgiving them, it's because they coming clean. I mean, first of all, you're forgiving them when you do the alchemy. You already forgave them. But then it's up to them whether they're going to go back into collaboration or they're going to go double down on the bullshit again and live, a lie or whatnot. Okay? And that depends whether there is a retaliation or there is a forgiveness. And there is no retaliation. And somebody, for example, may have had the genuine moment of weakness, and they did something, and it wasn't like from the highest self. They fell asleep for a moment, and they acted automated, and from the automated response, and it just wasn't who they are, And it happens. And it happens to anybody who is playing this game. And of course, when this happens, later when you kind of wake the fuck up, you realize, whoa, like I was almost like in a trance, doing stuff that I don't want to do, and now later I regret. And so when you are actually, ruin trust in that moment to somebody, the best thing, of course, to do is to come clean. You see, then there is a chance of forgiveness and not retaliating, and so their collaboration can continue. Okay, why am I saying all this? It's because this categorical or 100% categorical approach to life doesn't really work. For example, you say, well, all people have a tendency to do this, therefore I'm just not gonna play with anybody. That doesn't work. Like in that experiment, the way it looked like that half the people actually, because what they did, they spread everybody on the spectrum, and half the people went extinct from the game, and others sustained. It was sustainable collaboration, and it was a bubble. And these people there, the reason they were able to create that bubble is because they had boundaries. But because they didn't have such a rigid boundaries, it was wise boundaries, they were able to continue collaborate and reject anything that is not in the form of collaboration. Okay? And so the reason I'm saying this is because there's might be a temptation to go fuck all the people. That's not a good approach, because then there's not going to be anybody to play with, right? But you can't also you have to see what's really going on, for example, when this moment of distrust appears, you test the person out, right? Of course, like I said, you got to approach it with calm mind already, because if there was some trigger, you got to alchemize that. You approach it with calm mind, and you discuss it and you investigate the situation, and you give a chance, but you don't get attached to the outcome that they have to admit their fault and stuff like that. They have a full right not to admit their fault, and but the evidence might be obvious. And when you see that they do not admit their fault, but they actually are guilty of it, and you can feel the energy that they just close off and say, like, no, I'm not going to let this shit go, because then I'm going to be in a vulnerable position and whatnot, and that may not lead me to where I want to go out of fear. Okay, fine. But then they shut themselves off from the game. Okay? The reason it's important because it's applicable to all the relationships. All the relationships are games. Just think about it. Like, what is the relationship? You're playing some sort of role. You're playing some sort of game. And if there is no game being played, there is no relationship. It may be creative, like this is what I say, like Souls wants to create and play. If there's a creative collaboration, there's a relationship. If there is some sort of role you play for each other, there's a relationship. If there is no game, there is no relationship. Okay? So relationships are very important. But you also need to know how to approach it, so you create your own bubble of collaborative relationships where everybody plays kind of fair, and maybe on occasions there might be some miscommunication, or maybe like someone just like makes a little mistake or whatever, but then you go and look at it carefully, let everybody to clear the air, and if the air is cleared, there's a continuation of collaboration. Okay? But if there's like some sort of like a bad seed in there, it's gonna come up. And everybody's gonna realize who is the one that does not want to play the game fair no matter what. Now, let's look at this current conflict that's going on about the Ukraine. It really, let's be honest, this war is basically nothing to do with the Putin, nothing to do with Trump. None of them were instigating it. None of these presidents. These presidents are tired of the bullshit. They're tired of playing, this game. They're forced to play dirty. But what is really going on now? Everybody is meeting up and talking about this, right? And so let's have an honest dialogue. Let's forget about everything. Let's look at the honest dialogue. Is this something that you want? Say, the person may clearly state, like, no, I don't want this war to be happening. Okay, so that's the start. Now, why is this going on? Well, we did this because there was a propaganda, and that propaganda created this problem for us. And they say, well, we did this because your propaganda created this problem for us. And say, okay, well, the media did its thing, and try to breed the conflict between the countries where there wasn't any conflict in the first place. So now when everybody is clearing up the air and looking at it, it's like, is this what you want? No, I don't want. What do you want? I want peace and collaboration, and everything has to be fair. But it has to be fair. You can't bullshit us. It has to be fair. You can't say something that like, oh, we're building this massive, for example, I don't know what's really going on over there, but let's say one country is building a massive nuclear arsenal and pointing the rockets at the country and say like, oh, don't worry, it's not about us against you. No, you can't do shit like that. And then of course the evil happens on both sides. There's no, they're like, oh, one is fighting for good, another one is fighting for bad. It's not like that. But the bad is something that makes them fight. And so now when they're looking at it, it's like, where is that fucking thing? Where is the seed that made us fight with each other? So now there's clarity, and no people looking for that seed. And they're realizing that it wasn't these main politicians who were, they were the ones who were being manipulated. Now that they're talking to each other, they realize that like, we want the same thing. But let's look And I think they even realizing, when people say like, "Oh, it's Putin," like, "Oh no, it's Zelensky," or "It's no, it's Trump," but now everybody realizing that it wasn't any of them. None of them want this shit. Everybody are ready to have an honest and just collaboration. And whoever wants them to fight with each other now are going to be filtered out through this game theory. Because now people are saying, okay, let's collaborate and and then let's see where there is this miscollaboration pops up. Because now everything is clear, like I'm collaborating with you, you're collaborating with me, and as miscollaboration pops up, it's like, let's look at it. What happened? What party created that? What party does not want us to have peace? What party? You see what I'm trying to say? And now the focal point is being moved on the real reasons and the real people who represent the matrix, the real bad apples. And they are part of the media. They hide in the shadows. They do all sorts of bullshit ass ritualistic magic and shit like that. And so they're trying to run the machine of war. But now that the people are kind of waking up and they're looking for the source of that evil, little by little they will be able to isolate that evil. Hopefully they're not gonna create just another war out of it. But hopefully they will take the energy out of it and propaganda will stop working. Brainwashing will stop working. People will choose collaboration and have a strong boundary against the ones that do not want to have collaboration. Do you see what I'm trying to say? It's like oil in the water. You got to have these things, right? Until I just don't see how else it can work. I can see this is happening in nature. You can see the metamorphosis of the butterfly, the caterpillar cells versus the butterfly cells, where it's supposed to be one and whole organism, and yet there is a conflict going on during the metamorphosis, and there is a clear boundary being drawn within this organism, because caterpillar cells would attack the butterfly cells, so the boundary is necessary. Only some of the caterpillar cells turn into the butterfly cells later on. The rest of them, they just go extinct. This is metamorphosis. This was going on with the entire planet right now. It's a natural process, and it's happening in a complete relation of how well you play the game. You do need relationships in your life, and you don't have to be like specific about the people, because these patterns seem to be like these patterns of relationship appears to be always in your vicinity. Whether you're surrounded with one group of people or another, these patterns tend to come up. Okay? And you need to have a certain type of relationship with all of these patterns. And it's not going to be that you are nice and dandy with everybody. With some, you do need to have strong boundaries. The energy just doesn't mix. With some, sometimes you have to have a boundary, sometimes you can be open. And with the others, you can be always open, because that's how they choose to play. Okay? This way you will always have your energy bubble, and your energy bubble will say, we're playing a collaborative game, but we retaliate against somebody who does not want to play collaborative game, but not blindly. We look and give a chance to that individual to collaborate and change their mind. Put on the spot and make that choice. You're in or you're out. But we're not gonna have any bad apples here. Okay? And so that approach is the best approach. Because you're not asking anything that is not fair. You're asking everything that it has to be fair. And you're not doing it emotionally, because a lot of times, for example, if you're doing it emotionally, the person, you don't give a chance for a person to really settle in and be like give, like some moment of awareness. You're not giving them that chance. So if you don't give them that chance, then don't be surprised that they are going to double down on their bullshit. You always have to give a chance, and that chance will show it to you. It's like, do they have sufficient amount of awareness to steer into this path, or are they don't have sufficient amount of awareness and they're going to steer to that path? And you gotta let them choose in that moment. Okay? And that's how I ended up running my tribe, so to speak, and my relationships. I also have to say something, that all relationships are not physical. This is a huge one, and this is like a tough one to really look at it, but you'll see all your relationships are not physical, unless there is actual physical interaction that's going on between you two. What is not seen is not visible, therefore it's internal and it's subjective. So all your relationships are subjective. You see? Not to say that if you were to take the person who is supposed to be the darkest one and say, well, I'm going to imagine that darkest person right now is running in the garden with flowers and collaborating with everybody and playing the game fairly, that's going to happen. That perhaps ultimately in 1,000 years that can happen, or next life or whatever, but it doesn't mean that that person is just gonna suddenly, there are a certain type of people that are just not going to wake up, period, and you have to be okay with that. Not in this run of the game. There are people, or there are souls who went too dark, and they essentially have such a small aperture of awareness that they're not even a baby. They're more of a more like a, they have a capacity of consciousness of a mineral or an animal. You see what I'm trying to say? If you were to completely wake them up, so to speak, and they would not have any kind of dark mode operation, they would not operate at all. They would be a vegetable. Because that's how little of actual consciousness they have. That's just all theoretical what I'm saying, but I'm saying that you have to be okay in this game to have and really, honestly, this whole matrix is being sustained by these few entities who are, you would call them black magicians. But every time you win against the matrix, you take away their power, and their power, the magic weakens. And they're programmed to never give up because it's a program. But you also never give up also. So in the end, you are winning, and they're losing. But that's the nature of the game. You see? And the more you take your power back, the more they lose their power, and the more the power you gain. And like I said, I define power by the capacity for your soul to create the dream that you want. That's my definition of power. It is not like a force. It's not a force to control all your environment, even though you do control it, but you don't control it through the brute force. You control it through organizing the energy around everything. Okay? And so, yeah, and you need to build your tribe like that. Okay, so let's just finish off by talking about um, the types of relationships. Now, the types of relationships that we normally have and the types of games that we play are also related to these energies that we talked about, these states of consciousness, right? We talked about the 0 point, or like this ultimate peace, absolute stillness. That's the mother energy, that's love. We also talked about that bliss energy, that intense but completely organized energy that is streaming and seemingly with no end. That's power. That's that seed energy. That's the father energy. This is why when Jesus said, "Me and my Father are one," he meant to say that is that he's blissed out. That's what he was trying to say. Uh, so, all right. So we have the father, we have a mother, and then from there, uh, there's the son and a daughter. The son is the confidence energy, and the daughter is the innocence energy. And you need confidence and innocence, as like I said in the 2 videos ago. You need those two energies to be in the motion of creation and play. And the point there now is not this still void and white light. There's the point of the playfulness of the colors, which are the feelings, and it's almost infinite patterns that they can have, which are positive emotions. I used to think that emotions are all emotions are negative, but that's not. You can call. Now I say that there are coherent emotions and there are incoherent emotions. The coherent emotions are the feelings with the patterns. It's just basically, for example, if you look at the strings in the music, guitar strings, for example, each tone you have 7 tones, right? There's 7 feelings. Now you can play them in almost infinite ways, and that is the emotion. Okay? Because the emotion has a rhythm, and if you don't have rhythm, then you're gonna be just like right? It's just pure feeling, no emotion. But once you get the rhythm going, then that's when the emotion starts happening. And so that's why the creation and play is run by the emotions based on these solid feelings. Okay? So now we have 4 types of states of consciousness and their relationship. And so then look what kind of relationships we have, really. And so you as a consciousness, whether you play the masculine or the feminine, you will be in the relationship in 6 types of relationships. Watch. If you're the father energy relates to mother, relates to daughter, and relates to son. Okay? The son energy relates to father, relates to mother, and relates to sister. Okay? There are 6 relationships that every masculine soul has in this game, and there are 6 relationships that are the most important ones, and actually these are the only ones that you need. Because like you say, what about the friend? They usually have that. Okay. Okay, you got me. Yeah, there are friends also and that would be usually the confidence relationship to confidence, and that's friends, or the innocence relationship to innocence. There's a masculine friendship and there's a feminine friendship. All right. Okay, I admit there are friends also. No, there are, of course. Uh, so now, as a man, you technically have 7 types of connections that are very important to you. And actually, the whole game of life is about developing and these relationships where you can play them in a coherent way and collaborative way. Okay. On the feminine side, you have the mother relating to the father, mother relating to the daughter, mother relating to the son, which is like love relationship to confidence, love relationship to power, love relationship to innocence. Okay. And then you have innocence relationship to the confidence, which is type of sister to a brother, innocence relationship to power, which is father-daughter relationship, and then innocence relationship to mother, which is daughter-mother relationship. These are all very distinct type of connections. And the point of the game is, sometimes people call it like heal those, but I don't like to say that, because healing implies that there is a wound, but I don't see it as a wound because I don't see it as something that is inflicted. I see it as like it's a distortion that we started to play this game with this distortion in order to overcome the matrix, in order to reestablish these connections. Okay? So the real description of it would be fulfilling your soul desires, which are these collaborative relationships and all these dynamics. And if you're a man, for you it's going to be important to have a relationship with the mother energy, which is love, with the daughter energy, which is innocence, with the son energy, which is confidence, and so on. And you may say that there's a relationship power with power. There's also a relationship there. There's also a relationship there, power with power. And love with love, like, well, I didn't consider that there are self relationships as well, I suppose. Well, that brings us to 8 in total. But the point is of the game is that the healing, I don't want to use this word, fulfilling your soul desires in collaborating with all of these connections. That's the whole point. And you gotta let that happen the way it sort of like, you can't force this. For example, like if you have this approach and say, all right, that's the game that we're playing. If you don't tell the truth, if you're not being honest of how you feel and what you feel or whatever, that usually leads to some sort of betrayal. You got a chance to come clean. If you don't come clean, you're out. Someone else gonna take that part, because the thing about this game is that someone else gonna come and play that part for you, right? Because you set the boundary and you said like, right, yeah, you can play with me, but you can't be fake and you can't cheat. That's how we play here. And you make a choice. And as you know, there's an allowance, not the permission, but there's an allowance to make mistakes. You let people make mistakes. You let them fix these mistakes, and then decide whether they're going to be part or not. And that's the best thing that I can come up with. I saw this in evolution of my own consciousness. I saw this at first. I was like very categorical upon first betrayal. I don't even talk. I don't want to investigate anything out of my life. Then I was more flexible and forgiving, and that did not work either. And now I came to the conclusion is that, all right, when a mistake is made, approach it in a calm way, let them clear the air, and I don't actually make no decision here. I do not make any decision here. See, that's the thing. I realize that it's not about making decisions. It's about having the situation happen, having an emotional response, alchemizing it, approaching the situation again, investigating it with the clear mind, and seeing if there is a let go of whatever that happened or not. But at no point I made a decision. I just have this approach. It's almost like, I don't know, maybe it's like a code. You can call it a code. I said that's like approach to life. And you just approach life like that. And you let life to make its own boundaries. You did not impose any boundaries on reality. So you did not go that way of being a tyrant. There was so-called free will. You just set the parameters. That's the word. You set the parameters, which are, by the way, they're already there. It's not like you invented them. That was part of consciousness all along. That key was always there. You just discovered it. You see. And it's not a technique, because if you're going to use it as technique, it's not going to work. You're going to say, well, okay, so if they do this, now I do this. No, it's not a logical thing. If somebody betrays you, you're going to have that feeling there. You're going to have to alchemize that. And then from the clear mind, you approach the situation without attachment to the outcome. You don't know where it's going to go. But you're already okay with anything that can happen. And when you're already okay with everything that can happen, you give a person a chance to either come clean or not. You know? And so that's the way the cookie crumbles. As you can see, approaching this game of life is not kumbaya, but it's not a total maniacal approach either. There's a balance there, but it's not the balance that is logical. There's a balance that is energetic. Okay? But you cannot deny that there is a play going on. It's an energetic type of play at first. Okay, I think I sent the message here of how do you approach this game of life. And hopefully, these politicians that are in this little bit of conundrum will also find that that works, and will also create these pockets of collaboration, because collaboration actually is collaboration is more like a synergistic than war, of course. I mean, right? It's not rocket science. But the fact of the matter that there has to be this specific approach to it to weed out the bad apples. And look, you'll find that um, most of the people just had moment of weakness and just was they were on an ego trip thinking that it's not, and that the really dark people who are total complete psychopaths are just hiding in the shadows or pretending to be someone that they're not. But you can trace it to them. You can trace it to them. And the only thing that you have to do is take away the power from them, and the collaboration wins. And so that is the strongest approach, because there's a lot of collaboration, but there's also very strong sort of like when it's time to retaliate, you retaliate completely and totally after giving them a chance to come clean. And you can get better and better at it, like, but unless that spirit of fear is broken, you can't let them in your tribe. Even if you speak with these politicians and you say, like, well, it's a corrupt politician, yeah, they're playing the game the best that they can, and they're, again, they're probably on the ego trip, but there's a little bit of light there, or a lot, maybe a lot more than we think, that says, like, fuck, I wish this wouldn't happen. I wish everything would be in a more collaborative way. That's not what I really want, but I just have to do it because I don't see how to play the game any other way. A lot of people are like that. So they're very, very collaborative in their nature, but they would not let the system go because that's their lifeline at this point. You gotta let them see that if they let the system go, that there's something else to fall back on that is much, much more trustworthy than whatever they believe to be trustworthy. And that's all we can do. As you can see, what I'm talking about is the approach of holistic society. And it's not weak. It's not a bunch of kumbaya muppets. It is a protectorate. It is something that has the capacity to retaliate, but has very strongly and well-developed approach to diplomacy. And that, I think that the best country in the world would be the one that has a protectorate and no government. That every village is self-governed and have their own rules and principles to follow. And all the resources that are extra, which are going to be a lot when there's a sustainability, goes into protecting that way of life, which was the idea of America, but then got corrupted in 1916. That was the idea of America originally. And I guess we get another chance to create this type of mode of operating. Again, like I'm describing, this is not a weak approach, and this is not, non-military approach. This is not this idea of like, oh, why can't all be friends? Why can all be friends? This is not what the game we're being played. what kind of game we're playing. Uh, it's a different game, and it does require spikes. Okay. And the way I imagine it's like a strong protectorate that protecting a sustainable way of life. It is necessary. A strong militarized protectorate protecting sustainable way of life. And that's the true way of fighting evil. You don't attack, and so this military that I'm talking about, that's called protectorate, they never attack. They may retaliate, but they never attack first. Meaning it's always the motion of self-defense. But it's very powerful. And I do judo, and in judo, obviously that principle is very obvious. And they say that whenever opponent is attacking, that's when they're the most weakest. That's why a defense is always better than an offense. And so, even in judo, the trick is to fake out your opponent in attacking you and then counter-attack your opponent. If you're good at this type of fighting, you're good at judo. Because if you approach it through direct attack, the opponent's going to be ready. And so it's not going to work. You got to have opponent at the weakest point. And an opponent is never the weakest when they are attacking. So you psych your opponent out, fake the weakness, do whatever for them to attack you, and you catch them by surprise. And that's the secret of martial arts, by the way. Shh, don't tell anyone. All right, guys. That's enough wisdom for today. Play safe, play strong, and play well. Happy playing. Peace. See you in the next one.